Thanks for joining on this breakout session. My name is Deanna. I'm a board member with Timothy, and I'm honored to introduce you to Elizabeth Urbanowicz. She is a follower of Jesus Christ who's passionate about equipping kids to understand the truth of the Christian worldview. Elizabeth holds a BS at Barrie College in elementary education in Spanish. She has an MS Ed from Northern Illinois University in literacy education and an MA in Christian apologetics from Biola University. She began her professional career as a teacher at a Christian school, and now she works full-time developing comparative worldview and apologetic resources for children. Her goal is to prepare the next generation of children to be lifelong critical thinkers and most importantly to be lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ. So we're thankful to have her here. She's going to be discussing this topic, raising a generation to discern and follow truth. So I'll be
when an introduction is read, it kind of feels like you hate your own funeral. She's just sitting around and I'm like, I feel like I should be dead for this message. I'm so grateful to be here with you this morning. And so we're just going to open up with a time of prayer. So if you just bow your heads with me. God, we thank you so much, Lord, for the opportunity to come together today, or just to take a step back from our busy lives and to just seriously consider what you've called us to with the children that you have placed in our care. Lord, I just ask that over the next hour that you would just quiet our hearts and our minds, that your Holy Spirit would be at work just awakening us to the things that you want us to walk away from this session with. Lord, I ask that you would guide my words, that anything that's not from you would just fall to the side. And Lord, ultimately I pray for all of the children and teens that are represented by the faces in this room. Lord, I ask that you would be pursuing them, Lord, that you would feel the weight of their sin, that they would come to repent, Lord, and be reconciled to you, and would joyfully enter into your mission of reconciling the world to yourself. We love you, Lord, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Well, I'm looking forward to this time together today. I'm a mover when I talk, so I'm going to try not to get in front of this, but I make no promises. But we're going to talk today about raising a generation to discern and follow truth. And as Deanna said, my background is in the first decade of my professional career as an elementary educator in a Christian school just outside of Chicago in the U.S. And it was during my time as a Christian educator that I became passionate about equipping children to discern and follow truth. Because it was during my time in the classroom where I saw that these children that were in my classroom, they came from wonderful Christian homes where most of their parents were very serious about discipleship. They had them in a Christian school because they wanted them discipled. And I'm passionate about God and His Word, and so I knew that they were getting a biblically based education all day long. And most of them were fairly involved in the local church. They were still rapidly absorbing ideas from the culture, just as Brett spoke on, without any question. And I started to say, okay, what is the issue here? They know all the Bible stories. They know all the Bible verses. They have them memorized forward and backwards. They can give you the Jesus answer every single time. But when it comes to actually living faithfully in this culture, they're completely lost as to how to do this. And so that set me on a journey of looking for resources where I could just equip these children that God had placed in my care to discern what is true. And in that journey, I was teaching at that time. I was teaching grade 3, we call it 3rd grade in the U.S. And every single material that I found and I ordered was for high school on up. And I thought, well, you know, I'm so grateful that these resources exist. These resources are necessary. However, if I am seeing these problems at the age of 8, why in the world are we going to wait until they're 14, 15, or 16 to begin equipping them in this way? Because if we wait until that time, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to be very reformative in our work. We're going to have to tear down all these faulty ways of thinking. Where I thought, I have these kids way when they're just starting to develop their thinking skills. So if we can start at this age, we can actually be formative rather than reformative. And so that set me on a journey of looking even further, and I could not find any materials that did what I was looking for them to do in a way that was actually going to transform the way that a child thinks. Because if we want to be effective, we have to utilize the tools that God has given us. And brain research has shown that children need an average of 7 exposures to the same content before that content actually transforms the way they think, creates new neurological pathways that are going to be used on a daily basis. And so that I said, okay, I'm not a curriculum writer, but I guess I better start writing. So I started taking classes, started reading books, started writing curriculum for the children that God had placed in my care at that school. And several years into that, people started seeing the transformation of the students that had gone through my classes and were like, how can we get our hands on what you have? And I was like, you know, a third grade teacher, not a publishing house. You know, everyone take these classes, you'll be fine. And everyone was like, yeah, no, just tell us when you have this published. So several years into getting those kind of requests, God made it clear I was supposed to go back, get a master's in Christian apologetics to make sure I knew what I was talking about. Halfway through that degree, I left the classroom, and I now run an organization called Foundation Worldview, where we create resources for children ages 4 to 14 to help them understand the truth of biblical worldview. Now, during this session today, this morning, we're going to specifically focus in on truth. And just as Brett in the main session had us think through the concept of culture, the concept of truth is one that is also very confused in our current culture. This is a picture of my sister's family. My sister and her husband are actually stationed in Belgium right now. He's in the U.S. military, and this is their daughter, Jana. And my sister may or may not be in labor right now. I don't know. My cell phone's not working correctly, so she may or may not. She was due 2 days ago, so she may or may not be having their second child right now. But if you can't tell from the picture, my brother-in-law, Seth, has a little bit more melanin in his skin than my sister and I do. And one thing that kind of drives my brother-in-law crazy in the U.S. is he is continually told that he is not black because of some of his personal preferences, because of his beliefs about politics, because of some of the things that he likes and he does not like. And I don't know if it's the same way in Canada, but in the U.S., being black is now defined by certain lifestyle choices rather than biological realities. And so it drives my brother-in-law nuts, and it drives my sister nuts as well. But that is something right now, this biological reality of ethnicity is now being changed into something almost just subjective. You have to hold to these certain ideologies or these certain preferences if you're actually going to be considered according to what your biology is. And then this next picture is of my niece that you just saw in the last picture with my brother's 2 oldest children, his boys. And even at this young age, they very clearly understand what the difference is between a boy and a girl. Now, sometimes they all like to play together. My brother also has 2 girls who are younger that are not in this picture. Sometimes they all like to play together, and they all like to play trucks, or sometimes they all like to play house. They might have different preferences, but they all objectively understand Brady and Jonathan are boys, and Jana and Eliana and Sophia are girls. However, this year, my brother and his wife decided to send my nephew Brady to the private Christian school where I used to teach because the public schools in the area are teaching that you don't know yet who you are. You get to choose whether you're a boy or a girl. So even something as objective as sex is now viewed as, well, it's your preference. It's based on a subjective feeling. And just as Brett talked about, we're all swimming in this cultural tide, in this cultural ocean. So it's so easy for us to just get swept away in it. I have a really good friend at my church, and she has 5 boys. They're close in age with a big gap in between. She has a 17, a 16, a 15, a 6-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And so when we were first getting to know one another, she was kind of asking me what I did, and I was explaining it. She was kind of like, oh, that's really cool, but you know what? Because of our church setting, we actually don't need that. And I was like, oh, just tell me more about that. She was like, our boys are involved in the church community. So good, so necessary. That is necessary, being involved in the body of Christ. She's like, we do family devotions every night. Also, so necessary. She's like, and our boys, our older ones, she's like, they're involved in a great boys' Bible study at church. And I'm like, those are such good things. I said, you know what, Rebecca? I was like, tonight, go home and ask the, she calls them the bigs and the littles. I was like, ask the bigs if truth is true for everyone, or if it changes from person to person. She's like, okay, I'll do that. So she went to her oldest, Gavin, who is very, very mature, very bright. He's very spiritually sensitive. He does Bible study on his own. He knows a lot about the Word of God. And she was like, Gavin, is the truth true for everyone? And he was like, well, if we're talking about something like science, then yes, it is. And she's like, yes, I knew it. I got it. He's like, you know, if we're talking about water being 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, like that doesn't change no matter what you think, feel, or believe about it. He's like, but, and she said that her heart sank into her stomach. It's like, but if we're we're talking like about religion, that is gonna change. Like for me, Christianity's true because I grew up here in this home. He's like, but for my Muslim friends at school, or for my friends who don't really believe in anything, like Islam is true for my Muslim friends, atheism is true for my atheist friends, and she said her heart just sank. And what happened was she didn't realize that as we're swimming in this cultural tide, there's certain things that we need to directly cover with the children that God has placed in our care, or they are just going to naturally absorb that salt water of the culture without any question. So even though today I'm functioning as a speaker, those of you who have ever taught, you can take a teacher out of the classroom, but you can't take the teacher out of the classroom out of the teacher. And so I'm going to be functioning very much like a teacher, and like any good teacher, I have a goal for our time together. My goal is that by the time this hour is over, we would be able to articulate 3 skills our children need to discern and follow truth. I'm going to get that little mouse out of the way. There we go. So we're going to cover these 3 skills. The first skill kind of will seem like a no-brainer, kind of like, duh, but we need to think about it. And just as Brett had us try to define culture, because if we want to understand culture, we kind of need to know what it is. First of all, we need to make sure that the children that God has placed in our care can define truth. Because a lot of times we talk about truth, we don't actually know, what do we mean when we're talking about truth? And what is the definition of it? If you ask most children, even if you ask most adults, rather than giving a definition of what truth is, as a noun, what is this noun, what is this thing, they'll give a definition of their moral obligation to tell the truth. What is the truth? Oh, well, it's really important to tell the truth. It is, but that's not a definition. It is really important that we tell the truth. We know that we're supposed to tell the truth, but what is truth? What are we actually talking about? Well, philosophers classically have defined truth like this, and you don't need to write this down. Truth is that which corresponds with reality, meaning truth is what lines up with reality. We'll try to tell that to a 3-year-old, or 7-year-old, or even a 16-year-old, or even a 62-year-old. And most people are like, what? Well, an easy way to say this for someone of any age is just to say, truth is what is real. Truth is what is real. For example, you're all sitting in chairs, well, most of you in this room are sitting in chairs right now. What is real about that chair is that that chair was constructed to hold you up. It was constructed partially by plastic, part metal, I think some rubber at the bottom. If you tell me that that chair is a motorcycle, it doesn't matter how hard you think, feel, or believe that that chair is a motorcycle. You can sit on that chair and start making revving engine noises. That chair is not going to drag you at, trying to do the Canadian math in my head, 100 kilometers per hour. Like, not 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour down the highway. It's just not, because that's not what is real about the chair. What is real about the chair is what it's constructed out of, what it was designed to do. So truth is what is real. We want to make sure that the children God has placed in our care, no matter what age they are, they understand this definition. So first of all, we just need to tell it to them. Like anytime we're defining a word, this is what truth is. Truth is what is real. And then I'm going to give you some practical activities you can do with children of different ages to help them understand this. First off, if you're working with really little ones, like kids 7 and younger, those of you who have kids 7 and younger, you know that their bodies do not have that much control right now, okay? Whether we're talking about fine motor control or gross motor control. And because of that, they need their bodies involved at all times. So, with little ones, when you give them that definition, truth is what is real. So what is something that's not true? If truth is what is real, something that is not true is something that is not real. So then say, okay, we're going to play a game. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you some sentences. And if I tell you a sentence that is true, I want you to hold your arms out like this and say true as loud as you can. And then I'm going to tell you some sentences that are not true. They might be a little silly. And if I tell you a not true sentence, I want you to cross your arms like an X and say, not true. And so then just give them any sentences. You can do things if you're in a home setting, do things around your house. Okay, if you're in a classroom setting, things around the classroom. So if I was in this classroom right now with a bunch of kids 7 on younger, I would say, okay, here's a sentence. Right now, the lights are on. Is that true or not true? And then they look up, okay, and those lights over there, that's true, they're on. Okay, I have another sentence for you. This afternoon, we are going to eat lunch on the ceiling. Oh my goodness, that is so silly. That is not true. Just keep going through like that, because what you're doing, even though we're talking about silly things like whether or not the lights are on or whether or not we're going to eat lunch on the ceiling, what we're doing is we are creating mental categories in their minds. So that anytime they hear something, whether it's from you, whether it's from a friend, whether it's from YouTube Kids, whether it's when they're older or from TikTok or who knows, what social media platforms will exist 10 years from now, they have the categories. Is this true? Is this not true? And if we can create those categories, we're going to be, when they're that young, we're going to be way ahead of the game. Because if we've never talked about truth until someone is 16, 17 years old, we have a lot more backpedaling to do. Now, all of you, those of you who are working with 16, 17-year-olds who just started freaking out, don't. Okay? God has done stranger things than reveal truth to a 16 or a 17-year-old. But if you're working with kids then, maybe ages 8 to 12, something that you can do that's developmentally appropriate and fun for them is around your house, first of all, get something that you know that they're going to enjoy, whether it's chocolate, sticker, a date with dad certificate, something that you know that would be very valuable to them, and hide it somewhere around the house. Then write up a few different sets of instructions for finding that prize. Only one set of instructions will be a true set of instructions. All the rest of them, send them on a wild goose chase. Then get your kids together. If you only have one kid, you can do this in multiple steps. But get your kids together and say, okay, I have hidden somewhere in this house. I have hidden, whatever would be valuable to them. And here I have a couple different sets of instructions. Some of the instructions might be true instructions. Some of them might not be true instructions. We're just going to have to wait and see. Hand each kid a different set of instructions and let them go when one child is going to find the prize. And here is the key. You cannot have a prize for every child. That ruins the lesson. None of this, we're all winners. Okay? So you can only have one prize for the one child that finds it. And then, when everybody else comes back and is upset, talk about it. Say, okay, let's read through these directions. Read through all of the directions together and say, oh my goodness, this one said you were supposed to go down to the basement. The prize was upstairs under the bed. Did this lead you to the right place? No, it did not. What do we call that? When something doesn't show us what is real. Oh, that's a lie. That is not true. Okay, well, let's read this other set of instructions. Oh, this gave you the exact location of where the treasure was. What do we call that? Well, we call that truth because it is real. And then talk with them about, now, we don't know exactly who wrote these instructions. We don't know exactly who gave them. But the person who wrote them, the wrong instructions, were they sitting there thinking, I am so excited to send them on a wild goose chase all over the place? Or were they thinking, yeah, this is really where the prize is? And they wrote it down and they were tricked and they really wanted you to find it. Do we know? No, we don't know. Well, whether that person was sitting there thinking they couldn't wait to trick you or they were really trying to help you, in the end, did their intentions matter for the end goal? No. If you're following someone who's deceiving you, not telling you the truth, whether they're doing it and they're doing it with really bad motives, or they're doing it with really pure good motives, in the end it doesn't matter. And when you miss out on this prize, this chocolate, it's not the end of the world. We have more chocolate in the house. You'll be fine. But if we're talking about something big in life, or even eternity, the consequences can be huge. If you have kids who are older, or maybe a treasure hunt would seem like very juvenile to them, do something with a recipe. Get a recipe for a certain type of cookie. Have a few different versions of the recipe there. One is the true recipe that will show you how to really make these cookies. The other ones, make them have 10 times the amount of salt that they should, or 1/3 the amount of flour, okay, or no sugar at all. And then make the different recipes and compare them and talk about why do we only have one set of cookies that's edible? Why is that? Well, because that was the true instructions. Because it is the author of this recipe that want to define truth and then give some kind of practical activity so that our kids kind of feel the weight of that. That, oh yeah, knowing truth is important. So that's the first step. We need to make sure that we define truth and then do some kind of practical activity so it's not just this philosophical idea, but our kids get the practical in and outer workings of why we need to know what is true. The second step, we need to equip them to distinguish sincerity of belief from truth. They need to be able to distinguish sincerity of belief from truth. Because what is really big in Western culture right now? Authenticity. Okay, as long as you are authentic, that means that what you are believing, what you are feeling is true. And it's so easy for our children to buy into this lie that as long as I think, feel, or believe this, it is true. Do you have that? I should have figured this out beforehand. I didn't think about this. In Canada, do you have the store Hobby Lobby, or is that just the US? Or, okay, sorry. Okay, like a Michael's. Yeah. So in the US, the store, the kind of equivalent to Michael's, Hobby Lobby, has a lot more signs in it, like household signs, than Michael's does. And Hobby Lobby is run by Christians. They have great values and principles, but they have all of these signs that are like, with faith, anything is possible. And I'm like, really? Like, I'm 5'10". There's no way I was going to be a gymnast. Like, my body was not designed for that, no matter how much I believed it. Or, you know what? It's always been my dream to fly. Not in an airplane, but, like, with my body. Like, when I was little, I just used to have these dreams of, like, rising off the ground and being able to see everything down below. No matter how much faith I have in that, not all things are possible. The sincerity of my belief does not equal truth. And this is what we want to help our children understand. Because 20 years ago, the main influencers on TV, they were all playing characters. Like, if you ever hear Kirk Cameron talk about his time on, what is it, Growing Pains? Yeah, Growing Pains. He'll talk about Mike Seaver. Because he's like, Mike Seaver was who was on Growing Pains. It wasn't Kirk Cameron. So there was a separation between Kirk Cameron, the actor, and Mike Seaver, the character that he was portraying. It's not the same nowadays. Because nowadays, the people our children are being influenced by are the actual people. The TikTokers and the YouTubers. And so it's the actual people who are not playing a part, but they are just portraying themselves. And so it's really easy for our children to believe someone-who's a really nice person. Look at how excited he gets when he shares his belief. Clearly, the sincerity of this must equal truth. And sometimes, again, we're swimming in this cultural ocean. It's really easy for us to buy into this lie as well. That I have 2 houses down from me, my neighbors are Pakistani. They just moved here recently from Pakistan. Wonderful family, they're Muslim. I love them. And when I go over their house, first of all, they have pretty good food. So whenever my neighbor Sarah calls me or texts me and is like, hey, I'm making this for dinner tonight, I'm like, what time? Because they have really good food. And 5 times a day, the call to prayer comes through speakers in their house. They're very devout Muslims. And sometimes when I'm over there, it's really tempting for me to believe, oh, they're really sincere in their belief and they're really nice people. And you know what? Maybe their sincerity of their belief is true for them. But that's not, I know, and I have to remind myself that is not the way the world works. And I have to remind myself that Islam makes claims that are just the opposite of Christianity. That Christianity claims that Jesus is the Son of God. The Quran specifically says God has no son. Okay, those 2 claims can't both be true. Christianity teaches that Jesus died on the cross. Muslims have different opinions of what happened, but the most popular one is that Jesus did not die on the cross, but God changed Judas's face to look like Jesus, and it was Judas that died on the cross. Christianity teaches that Jesus rose from the grave. Islam teaches that Jesus did not rise from the grave. Both cannot be true, and that's what I have to remind myself when I'm at my friend's house. But it's so easy for our children to buy into this lie. So what I like to do with the kids that God has placed in my care is just kind of play the what if game. So give examples of What if we didn't know the truth about X? Let's start off with easy physical examples. So I'll say, what if I didn't know the truth about the side of the road that cars drive down? What if I thought that cars drove down the opposite side of the road? What might happen? And if you have older kids, they're not going to care about this example, but if you have little ones, they're going to love it. Oh my gosh, they might get run over by a car! Their guts might be all over the street! Okay? So really fun to think about that one. And you can even tell them a time when you didn't know the truth about something important and it cost you. I used to tell my students that in 2015, my sister and I went over to the UK for a month and traveled around. And when we got there, we were significantly jet lagged. And I was not thinking correctly, and I did forget that in London, cars drive down the opposite side of the road. And I went to cross the street, and I'm walking across the street, and all of a sudden I feel myself being jerked back because my sister pulled me back because I hadn't looked the right way for cars. And so not knowing the truth, it doesn't matter the sincerity of our belief. Not knowing the truth can have serious consequences. If you're talking with older kids, talk about medicine. What if someone has cancer and they don't know the truth about the correct treatment for their cancer? Nowadays, they can even find the molecular profile of cancer. What if they don't know the truth about the molecular profile of their cancer and the correct treatment for it? What if they're taking Advil for it? Or if they decide to take ice cream to treat it? Okay, they might sincerely believe that that's going to cure them. But what's going to happen? The cancer is going to continue to multiply and grow within their body and increase in stages. That can have life-altering consequences. I used to tell my students this story of one time in the summer. I was by the pool in my community, and I was just reading a book, and since I'm a teacher, I have the great ability to be able to be reading and also paying attention to everything else that's going on around me. So I was reading a book, and this dad comes to the pool with his son, who's probably like 6 years old, and they had forgotten the water wings or the whatever was going to keep the kid afloat. And the dad was feeling lazy and did not really feel like going back to their house to get it. So the kid's like, Dad, we forgot my water wings. And he's like, oh, you're going to be fine. You're just going to be fine without it. So the dad's like lounging on the chair. And so the son's like, no, Dad, we need to go back and get him. I'm really nervous. I don't know how to swim. And he goes, son, whatever you believe you can achieve. And at this time, I'm like, full attention. I am really curious to see how this is going to play out. So I watch, when the kid's like sticking his toe in, and the dad's, kind of half-heartedly paying attention. And the kid keeps going, Dad, I'm scared. And the dad keeps going, just believe it, and you can swim. Best dad of the year right there. So eventually, the kid believes his dad. He jumps in. The kid's, probably, I don't know what the meter conversion is. I'm sorry. He's probably about 4 feet tall. And he jumps into where it's 5.5 feet, and he sinks like a rock. And so what does the dad do? The dad dives in and rescues him. But it didn't matter the sincerity of that dad's belief. It didn't matter the sincerity of that kid's belief. There is a certain way, there are certain things we have to do with our body in order to allow ourselves to float or to swim. And it didn't matter how much that kid or that dad believed that that boy could swim, he sank like a rock. And so with these physical examples, it's kind of easy for our kids to get it. Yeah, it doesn't matter how sincerely I believe I can fly. I'm going to fall if I'm not on a hoverboard or there's some other kind of flying suit. But then, sometimes when it comes to religious claims, it is a little bit more confusing. Because when we're talking about religious claims, it's not something we can take into the science lab and test like we can with different scientific claims. But that doesn't mean that religious claims can't be proven true or false. Think about what Christianity rests on. Christianity rests on one singular event, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. If you read the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul says, and if Christ has not been raised, you are still in your sins, and your faith is futile. If in fact Christ has not been raised from the dead, we are of all people most to be pitied. Okay, Paul wasn't just saying, this is just kind of some feelings, some personal preference. He's saying, no, if Jesus was not raised, this is false. And he's not only does he say it's false, but we of all people are most to be pitied. And that continual call in the Gospels of discipleship. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. Okay, the Christian life is one of daily crucifixion to self. That's what it is. And if that is false, we, of all people, are most to be pitied, because we are wasting the only life that we have, not following after any of our heart's desires, but instead dying to ourselves daily. But then when you continue reading that chapter, Paul continues and he says, but in fact, Christ has been raised. And not only does Scripture talk about this, but there is external evidence that we can look at for the truth of the resurrection of Jesus. And so we want our children to understand that even the truth of Christianity does not hang on the sincerity of our belief. It hangs on the objective truth of the resurrection of Jesus. And this is something we need to make sure that we understand. Because my first few years of students, when I was noticing this problem, now each year I get Facebook messages or texts from former parents that are like, hey, so-and-so went off to university, whether it was a Christian or a secular university, and they came home over Christmas break, and they don't know if God exists anymore, or they don't believe Jesus is actually God, and they're not sure that the Bible is actually God's word. And most of the parents are asking for my help, which I'm grateful that they're reaching out. But then they usually follow up with something, I don't really know what to say because I just have faith. I just have faith. And it's like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean you have faith? It's not the sincerity of our belief that makes Christianity true, or the lack of sincerity of someone's belief that makes it false. It's either Jesus rose from the grave and Christianity is true, or he is still somewhere in a grave and it's false. Okay, so the first two things we covered, we need to make sure that our kids know how to define truth. Second, we need to help them distinguish sincerity of belief from truth. The third thing that we need to do is equip them to discern objective truth claims from subjective preference claims. If you're thinking, Elizabeth, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's okay, so we're going to camp out here for the next half hour. So think back to your days of grammar in the younger grades. Think back to diagramming a sentence. Think about the sentence, Tim kicked the ball. In the sentence, Tim kicked the ball, Tim is the subject of the sentence. He is what the sentence is all about. The object of the sentence is the ball. Tim kicked the ball. The ball is outside and separate from Tim. So if we're talking about an objective truth claim, we're talking about any claim where the truth or falsehood of that claim is outside of us. It's not dependent on our thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. Anytime we're talking about a subjective preference claim, we're talking about something that is controlled by our inner world. Okay, something that is based on our preference. And we're going to dive deeper into this. Now, most of the time, and I'm sure even most of us in school, we're taught this dichotomy of fact versus opinion. Which, it's not the worst dichotomy. However, I think it's kind of lacking because in the world in which we live, the only things that are counted as facts are the things that are scientifically conclusive. So anything that's can't be scientifically verifiable, it's like, well, that's your opinion. That's just your opinion. Or when you think about certain things that aren't exactly scientifically verifiable, like think about historical claims. We can't necessarily scientifically verify that a bunch of historical events from ancient history took place. We can look for evidence that points to that, but my belief in the existence of a certain Egyptian pharaoh is not my opinion. It's not my opinion that that pharaoh existed. Either he did exist, or he did not exist. Same with the resurrection of Jesus. It's not my opinion that Jesus rose from the grave. Either he did, or he did not. So I think rather than this fact-opinion dichotomy, what we need to teach our children is objective versus subjective. Because any objective claim, one that's outside of us, it's something that can be proven true, or it's something that can be proven false. A subjective preference, it can't be proven or disproven. I'll give you an example. My mom says that she's not exactly 100% sure that she is my mom. She says she was pushing with me for 5 hours, so she's pretty sure she is. But she's not 100% sure because I can't stand chocolate. My mom is a chocoholic. My mom has to keep chocolate outside of the house because if she keeps it inside of the house, all of it ends up in her stomach. Where ever since I was little, the thought of like taking a handful of M&Ms and eating them makes me feel nauseous. Like I just got a nauseous feeling in my stomach just saying that. It is my subjective preference that chocolate is gross. You have no way of proving whether or not it's true because it's based on my inner world. You could give me a handful of chocolate, I go, but inside I'm like, that actually tastes good. You have no way of knowing that. Okay? Or you could give it to me and I could like be smiling, which is what I used to do as more of a people pleaser, like, thank you so much. And on the inside I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to throw this up. Subjective claims like chocolate, like I don't like chocolate, chocolate is gross, they can't be proven true or false. Where objective claims, they're testable. And so this is what we want to help our children understand. If you're working with little guys, like if you're like Elizabeth, I have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old. I'm not even going to be able to say objective. Sometimes you're right. So what we can call this is truth versus feelings. We're going to talk about this. Remember that game that I gave you before for the little guys where you go true or not true? Once you have the true, not true part of the game down, a few days later add a third category. Feelings. Add a feelings category. And then just choose a subject that you know people have feelings about, like cute little puppies. Okay, and say, okay, we're going to play that game again. And I have some sentences for you. If they're true, what are you going to do? Show me what you're going to do. That's right, you're going to hold up your arms and say true. If they're not true, what are you going to do? That's right, you're going to cross your arms into an X and say not true. Now, sometimes I might say a sentence that's a feeling. And so what I want you to do is I want you to give yourself a hug and say feeling. So then give them sentences about puppies. Okay, first one, puppies are baby dogs. That's true. Oh my goodness, they're so cute. Then next, puppies fly. Oh, that's so silly. That's not true. Okay, here's a harder one. Puppies are fun. That's actually a feeling because you know what? Some people feel like puppies are really fun when they're playing with them. And other people, when puppies are chewing on their shoes or the arm of the sofa, do not feel like puppies are very fun. And so just give lots of different examples of true, not true, and feelings. Little ones love it. There's 2 boys from my church that usually once a month or so, I'll take them home after church so their parents can go out on a date. I'll just feed them lunch and we'll read some books, play a few games, then I'll bring them back. And always on the way home from church in the car, they'll be like, Miss Elizabeth, can we play the truth and feelings game, please? And they love it. And so we'll play it in the car, and then as they got even better, I said, okay, you know what? I think you're going to have to try to play this with me now. I want you to think of some sentences that are true, some that are not true, and some that are feelings. And their mom has told me that this is actually played out in real life, that they'll be watching a show or they'll be having a conversation, and her 6-year-old will say, oh, but mommy, that's just a feeling. That's just a feeling. And they get it because we're creating these mental categories. We're creating these neurological pathways through thinking so that while they feel like they're just playing a game, we're actually setting the stage for how they're going to be thinking for the rest of their life. With older kids, bring out the cookies, okay? If you want to, you can bake some cookies together. You can just bring out some cookies and say, okay, here's what I want us to do. I want us to think of some sentences about these cookies that are objective. Like, they're either true or they're false. And I want you to come up with a list of sentences that are either true or false. Like, for example, I could say, these cookies were baked at my home. That's an objective claim. Either it's true or it's false. Then I want you to think of a list of some subjective claims. Some things that are just based on someone's thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. And then if I say, chocolate chip cookies are not worth the calories, that's my subjective preference because I don't like chocolate. So that's a subjective sentence. But you could also say things like, these cookies are too soft. These cookies are too small. These cookies are just right. These cookies are delicious. Okay, so just come up with a list of sentences, some that are just based on personal preference, some that are either objectively true or objectively false. Like I could look at these and I could say this is ice cream. Okay, but we can prove that this is not milk, cream, and sugar that has been frozen. But there are other ingredients in this. Another claim is these cookies are gluten-free. These cookies are gluten-free. Either that's true or that's false. And if it's false, if someone with celiac believes that, they're going to be in trouble. Okay? It doesn't matter how much they think, feel, or believe that these cookies are gluten-free. If they have the cookies, their body is going to know because it's going to have to process that gluten and it isn't going to be pretty. If you're working with even older kids, you can kind of play a similar game like I talked about with the little ones. Please don't have them move their bodies and roll their eyes at you. You say, okay, I want you to tell me, I'm going to give you some sentences. I want you to think through whether the claim that I make is objective. And you can, if you want to, you can give them the hand motion. It's objective, either it's true or it's false. Or it's subjective. It's just based on personal preference. So an example of this would be, a nice easy one is, Earth is round. Is that objective or subjective? It's objective. Okay? Something you can do that would be really important with this is then to flip it around and to say Earth is flat. Because a lot of times kids get mistaken and they think subjective means anything that's not true. But that's not true. So say, okay, Earth is flat. And I might say, oh, subjective, that's not true. And say, wait a minute. Is Earth being flat based on someone's feelings? So if someone's feelings change, does Earth poof, flatten out? No, it doesn't. Our internal feelings cannot change the shape of Earth. So that's an objective claim. It's objectively false. But that's the whole point of it. Remember, the subjective claims can't be proven true and they can't be proven false. They're just internal personal preferences. So even if it's wrong, it's objective. That's the whole point. Then another easy one. Ice cream is the most delicious dessert. Objective or subjective? Subjective. Some people feel like it's the most delicious dessert. Some people mildly like it a lot, or don't like it at all. It's all based on our taste buds and our personal preferences. Okay, this car was manufactured by Jeep. Is that objective or subjective? It's objective. Even if I said this car was manufactured by Toyota, that would also be objective. Okay, I'm making a claim that's either true or false. That would be objectively false. Now, I apologize. I did this presentation with the teachers yesterday, and I realized I should have switched this next picture out for a picture of a hockey ring. Forgot to do that. The claim, baseball is an entertaining sport. Objective or subjective? Subjective. Actually, maybe the problem further thought it's better than I didn't do that. Yeah. That's some argumentation. Hockey being an entertaining sport. So maybe this was a good call. Then we want to get into some trickier ones. Think about the claim, the sky is blue. It's a trickier one because some people are like, wait a minute, okay, but like most people see the sky as blue, but what about people that are colorblind? They don't perceive it as the same color. It's like, well, if someone's colorblind, we know that there is something that is objectively different about their eyes and the way that they perceive things. So that doesn't change the truth about whether or not the sky is blue, because why does the sky appear blue to us? Because of the spectrum of light. There's a red end of the spectrum and a blue end of the spectrum. The blue end of the spectrum has shorter wavelengths and higher frequencies. So when the light from the sun comes through our atmosphere, we see that end of the spectrum with the shorter wavelengths and the higher frequencies, and we perceive that as blue. Then somebody else is like, oh, what about the cloud? The sky is still blue, we just can't see it through the clouds. Okay, but we need to think through these trickier examples so that we're not stumped when our 16-year-old's like, yeah, but what about this? We're like, wait a minute. I might not know the answer right now, but we can search it out. Then we also want to have them think about more serious claims, moral claims, like the claim, all human life has value. When someone says all human life has value, they're making an objective claim that's either true or false. Either all human life inherently does have value, or all human life does not inherently have value. That's an objective claim. And that really is the claim with the abortion debate. Do all humans inherently have value? Or is value bestowed upon us by how much we are desired by others? That is the claim. So both sides of the debate are making objective claims. It's not about our personal preference. It's an argument over what's actually true. Over whether, in the words of Dr. Seuss, it's true that a person is a person no matter how small. Okay, is that true or is it not true? Another claim that's good to have our kids think through is the claim, God exists. Claim God exists. The first time I ever gave this presentation, I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at a teacher's conference. And I was actually having the teachers do this, like I was having them actually go like objective or subjective. And this woman in the front row, this teacher in the front row, said, well, do you mean for me or for somebody else? I was like, no. Listen to the claim. Is the truth or falsehood of this claim, is it outside of me or based on my internal world? And she's like, yeah, I know, for me or for someone else. I was like, oh boy, let's talk afterwards, especially when we're guiding the next generation. But the claim God exists, or conversely, the claim God does not exist. The truth or falsehood of that claim is not based on my internal world. Either God exists or God does not exist. So we want to help, again, just create these mental categories for the children that God has placed in our care. Because if we think just about this culture that Brett was describing, we know as Christians God is unchanging. We know that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And God's word is unchanging. We know that the grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. What is changing is the culture. And because of that, we have to understand how can we help our children faithfully navigate this cultural moment. And when you think about the amount of information that our children are presented with, just because of the culture in which we live and all of the technology that's available to us, which is not always a bad thing, but it's such prevalence of information in 1 year of our kids' lives, they're going to be faced with more competing ideas than most humans throughout history have been faced with for their entire lives. And so that's why it's so important that we give our children these categories of, is this objective, and then is it objectively truth or objectively false, or is it just subjective? Is somebody just sharing with me their personal preference, which is nice, but it shouldn't change how I think, feel, or believe. So we must prepare them with these categories to faithfully navigate all of the ideas that are coming their way in culture. Now, when I first started to give this presentation, a little bit of pushback that I got from people was saying, oh, if you're creating this dichotomy, especially with little ones of true, not true, true and not true versus feelings, you're just going to teach them to suppress their feelings, to negate their feelings. And I just want to be really clear that I am not at all saying that emotions should be negated. Emotions should not be negated. When we look at the world from a distinctly biblical worldview, we see that God has created us in his image as holistic beings, and that involves our emotions. I'm someone who greatly loves reason, and so if I had a choice, there would be this little switch where I would go, no emotions, perfect, moving forward with the facts and logic. But that is not obviously the best thing, because that is not how God designed us. God has designed us with emotions, and our emotions are important. However, being created in God's image is not the entire story, as Brett was talking about. Genesis 1:27, about us being created in God's image, is not the end. There's then Genesis 3, the fall. And with the fall, every single part of us was broken and marred by sin. And that involves our emotions. So our kids need to know that emotions shouldn't be negated, but emotions should be discerned. So when we're teaching them to think about subjective emotions, we should be having them ask themselves, does this emotion point me toward the truth, or does this emotion point me away from it? My friends at Mama Bear Apologetics, in their first book, they have a sentence that I think is brilliant. They say, emotions are a great check engine light, but a terrible GPS. Which is true, that our emotions are always pointing us towards something. Why am I feeling this way? That's an important question for us to ask ourselves. Psalm 62 tells us to pour out our heart to God, pour out our heart to God at all times, O people. And that's what the psalmist model, continuously pouring out our hearts before the Lord, but then discerning those emotions. And in most of the Psalms, where the psalmists are pouring out their hearts, they express their emotions to God, and then they remind themselves of truth. Why are you downcast, O my soul? Okay, again, praise the Lord. Okay, so emotions shouldn't be negated, they shouldn't be discerned. We need to teach this question: does this emotion point me toward the truth, or does this emotion point me away from it? And even little ones can be trained to ask and answer this question. Don't ask it to them while they're throwing a temper tantrum in the grocery store. And then remove them from the grocery store. They're screaming and flailing. You're like, now is this emotion pointing you towards the truth? It's not going to work. Okay? But an hour later, when there's been a consequence, and they've calmed down, then you can debrief and talk about, Mommy said no when you asked if you could buy that candy in the store. What did you do? Yeah, you started yelling and screaming. Why did you do that? Yeah, because you felt mad inside. Yeah, that's a feeling. God has given us feelings, hasn't he? Now that anger, did that anger point you to truth of what you should have done? And what was the truth about why Mommy said no? Or did that anger point you away from the truth? Yeah, that anger pointed you away from the truth. It told you that the best thing to do would be for you to yell, scream, and cry. Or what should you have done? You should have said, I'm feeling sad, but it's okay. Okay? Now, sometimes when we're spending a whole hour talking on truth, sometimes the question comes up, is it really worth spending all this time on truth? Because those of you who are parents or grandparents or teachers are thinking, oh my gosh, listen, my life is so busy already. I have no idea what our family schedule looks like. I have no idea what my classroom schedule looks like. This is so much. And you're right. Thinking about adding something else to our daily schedule or to our daily lives is a lot. I'm not suggesting that you have to do truth instruction 365 days of the year. Okay, that would be a little bit much. But what I am suggesting is that we all need to lay this foundation so that we can reap the benefits in the future. I was sharing yesterday with the teachers that when I first started teaching, I read this book called The First 6 Weeks of School, which kind of lays out the systematic plan for how you can train the students in your classroom to learn well, to behave well, to think well, and it sets out this plan, but the key is you have to spend the first 6 weeks of school doing that instead of focusing on the curriculum. And so that's a kind of scary thing, because as a teacher, there's actually more in the curriculum to cover than hours that you have in the school day. But the amazing thing was that I found, as I followed that plan, for the first 2 months of school, I was horribly behind my teaching partners in the curriculum. They were chapters or units ahead of me in every single subject. But by Christmas, I was always ahead. Why was that? Because I was not spending hours a day on classroom discipline. My students knew my expectations. They knew I loved them, and when they didn't meet those expectations, they knew they were disciplined. End of story. I wasn't spending all this time on classroom discipline. They also knew the expectations of learning, what they were expected to do, because we had practiced it over and over and over and over again before they ever actually read a book. We modeled for 30 whole days what it looks like to positively silent read, that your eyes are on the book, your body's not moving around, it's nice and still, okay, you're not distracting anybody else. And you know what? Usually by day 31 of the school year, even though my students couldn't read silently for more than a minute sustained at the beginning of the school year, they could go at least 30 minutes without getting up, without taking their eyes off the book, without distracting anyone else for the 31st day of school. And this is what I'm saying we really need to do with our children. That if we set these categories of true, not true, and feeling, we're going to be miles ahead of where we would have been if we're just continually playing catch up with every single cultural situation that comes our way throughout the day, the week, the month, the year. Also, when we're teaching them about truth, this is really the foundation for understanding the biblical worldview. I like to give the example of the movie The Karate Kid. Now, I am not endorsing the movie, but I am saying there's a scene in it that I think is beneficial. So in The Karate Kid, if you've never seen it, Daniel is the main character, is being bullied, and so he goes to Mr. Miyagi to learn how to do karate. And for the first part of his training, all Mr. Miyagi has him do is put wax on the car, wax off the car, paint the fence. And eventually Daniel's tired of it. And there's this scene where he goes to Mr. Miyagi, and he uses very colorful language, which I will not use for you this morning. But he says, I am done. I am done waxing your car. I am done painting your fence. I am done doing all your dirty work. And all of a sudden, Mr. Miyagi just shouts out, wax on! And he does wax on, and Mr. Miyagi starts to fight him. And all of a sudden, Daniel realizes that the wax on, wax off, paint the fence motions were the actions that he needed, the muscle memory that he needed for the basics of karate. It's the same way with our children understanding the difference between truth, untruth, and feelings. This is something that we cover in the earliest curriculum that we have at Foundation Worldview. And she went in to tell us that after her son had gone through our first unit on truth, her son had come home from school. He was in 2nd grade, and that day at school, it was a public school. He had a substitute teacher who was a biological male who identifies as a female, was dressed as a female, and went by Ms. So-and-so. So the mom's, in the car just asking her son about his day, and he's like, oh, Mrs. So-and-so is absent today, and then he's telling his mom about the substitute teacher, and as she's hearing more about it, she's saying, internally, she's like, oh my gosh, because they haven't talked about transgenderism yet. And so then the mom says, so what were your thoughts when you had this substitute teacher? He said, Mom, it is so sad because he is not following what is the truth of who God created him to be. He's just following his feelings, and feelings are not the same as truth. She didn't have to have a whole conversation preparing him for the transgender movement when he encountered it for 8 hours a day in his classroom, but because he already had those mental categories, he was able to evaluate what was going on. There is an objective reality about this teacher of mine today. And that objective reality is that teacher is male. However, this teacher is following his subjective feelings that he is a woman and dressing like a woman and having us call him a woman's name. So if we can lay this foundation, even from the earliest of ages, we're going to be miles ahead of where we would have been by age 7, by age 9, by age 13, by age 17. Now I told you at the beginning of our time together, that like any good teacher, I had a goal for us. That goal is that we would be able to articulate 3 skills our children need to discern and follow truth. And we covered those. The first one was we need to equip our kids to define truth. We talked about that. We gave examples of the true, not true game. We talked about truth is what is real. Gave the example of the treasure hunt. Also gave the example of the recipe. And then the second step was to distinguish sincerity of belief from truth. And we talked about just playing the what if game. What if people didn't know the right side of the road that cars drove down? What if a cancer patient didn't know the truth about the type of medicine they needed to take? What if someone believed with their whole heart they could swim, but they had never swam before? Okay, so playing that what if game so they understand that the sincerity of belief is very different than truth. And then giving them the categories, equipping them to discern objective truth claims, which again for little ones we just call true or not true, from subjective preference claims, which for little ones we just call feelings. And we talked about true, not true feelings game. Then we talked about the cookies and having them create a list of sentences that are objective claims and subjective claims. If you're interested just in more information about resources and materials like this, you can go to the Foundation Worldview website, which is just foundationworldview.com. And if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit and I'd be happy to answer them. But thank you so much. Deanna, do you have any closing words?
Things. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much for this presentation. I think you're